Society loves a villain, but they love a public execution even more. When an arrogant Wall Street executive deliberately humiliated a brilliant plus-size accountant in front of New York's elite, he expected polite laughter. Instead, he summoned the city's most ruthless syndicate boss and signed his own absolute ruin. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan smelled of old money, expensive orchids, and the faint metallic tang of ruthless ambition. It was the annual St. Jude Winter Charity Gala, an event where millionaires rubbed shoulders with billionaires and where reputations were minted or destroyed over glasses of Dom Perignon. Nora Caldwell stood near the edge of the room, a flute of sparkling water in her hand, trying to remain invisible despite her striking appearance. At 28, Nora was a senior forensic accountant for a top-tier firm. She was brilliant, commanding a six-figure salary, because she could trace hidden offshore assets better than the FBI. But in this room, none of that mattered. In this room, all anyone saw was her size. Nora was fat. She was a size 20 in a sea of size zeros, a woman with wide hips, a soft stomach and thick thighs, surrounded by hollow-cheeked socialites who lived on green juice and Adderall. For years, she had fought a grueling war with her body, battling a severe thyroid condition that made weight loss nearly impossible. Eventually, she had chosen peace. She had chosen to love herself. Tonight, she was wearing a custom-draped emerald green silk gown that hugged her curves beautifully, her dark hair pinned up in an elegant twist. She looked gorgeous, and more importantly, she felt gorgeous. Until Bradley Harrison walked in. Bradley was a junior partner at Oaktree Capital Management, a man whose tailored Tom Ford suits barely concealed his deeply ingrained cruelty. He was also Nora's ex-fiancé. He had proposed to her 3 years ago, back when she was a size 12. When her illness flared up and the weight began to accumulate, his affection had rapidly soured into resentment. He had broken off the engagement via a text message, citing that she had let herself go and was no longer an appropriate representation of his brand. Tonight, Bradley was not alone. Clinging to his arm was Evelyn Carmichael, a former runway model whose waist was roughly the circumference of Nora's thigh. Nora turned her back, hoping to blend into the shadows near the extravagant ice sculpture, but Bradley's radar for cruelty was too finely tuned. He spotted the emerald green dress from across the room. With a smirk that made Nora's stomach drop, he guided Evelyn directly toward her, cutting through a group of state senators and tech CEOs. "Well, if it isn't Nora," Bradley's voice cut through the low hum of the string quartet. Nora took a slow breath, forcing a polite, detached smile onto her face. "Hello, Bradley. Enjoying the gala?" "We are," Bradley said, his eyes raking up and down her body with unconcealed disgust. He didn't bother to introduce Evelyn. Instead, he raised his voice just enough to ensure the surrounding circle of elites, including Senator Thomas Hayes and a few high-profile hedge fund managers, could hear him. "I must say, I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think the catering staff was allowed to mingle with the guests." A few people in the vicinity turned their heads. Evelyn let out a high-pitched, breathy giggle. Nora felt a hot flush creep up her neck. "I'm here because my firm audited the charity's accounts, Bradley. I uncovered the $2 million in discrepancies that made this gala possible. Excuse me." She tried to step past him, but Bradley deliberately shifted his weight, blocking her path. He was showing off now, performing for the wealthy sharks around him. "Always so defensive," Bradley sneered, holding his scotch glass delicately. "I'm just saying, Nora, it's a brave choice. Wearing silk. It really emphasizes everything, doesn't it? I read an article recently about the structural integrity of the floorboards in these historic hotels. Let's hope the Pierre reinforced their foundations before you walked in. We wouldn't want a sinkhole in the middle of the charity auction. The cruelty of the joke was so blatant, so juvenile, that it shattered the sophisticated veneer of the party. The silence that fell over their corner of the ballroom was deafening. Senator Hayes looked away, pretending not to hear. Several socialites covered their mouths, muffling their laughter. No one stepped in. No one defended her. Nora stood, completely frozen. The emerald dress that had made her feel like a queen an hour ago suddenly felt like a neon target strapped to her back. Her eyes burned with humiliated tears, but she refused to let them fall. She gripped her glass so tightly her knuckles turned white, her brilliant mind racing desperately, trying to find a witty retort, a dignified exit. But the sheer public humiliation choked the words in her throat. She was a brilliant auditor, a fiercely independent woman, but in that agonizing second, she was just the fat girl being mocked by the prom king. Bradley smiled, taking a triumphant sip of his scotch, basking in the cruel amusement of his peers. He opened his mouth to deliver another punchline. I find it fascinating. A low, dark voice resonated through the sudden quiet, that a man drowning in $60 million of illicit debt has the audacity to critique anyone's structural integrity. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The quiet snickers died instantly. From the crowd behind, Nora stepped a man who looked like he had been carved from marble and obsidian. Gabriel Moretti. Even in a room full of powerful men, Gabriel was a terrifying anomaly. Publicly, he was the CEO of Moretti Logistics, a shipping and real estate conglomerate. Privately, he was the undisputed head of the most powerful criminal syndicate on the eastern seaboard. He was a man who didn't make idle threats. He made people disappear. Standing at 6'4", dressed in a bespoke charcoal tuxedo that screamed quiet, dangerous wealth, he radiated a lethal authority. Gabriel did not look at Bradley. Instead, he stopped directly beside Nora. He turned his head, his sharp, dark eyes sweeping over her emerald gown. There was no pity in his gaze, only profound appreciation. Green is unequivocally your color, Miss Caldwell. Gabriel said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that commanded the attention of every soul within earshot. You look breathtaking. Nora's heart gave a violent jolt. She recognized him instantly from the financial dossiers she occasionally had to cross-reference at work. Gabriel Moretti was a ghost, a myth, a monster in a custom suit. And he knew her name. Thank you, she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Gabriel finally turned his attention to Bradley. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a coldness so absolute it made Evelyn physically shrink back. Bradley's triumphant smirk faltered his face, draining of color. Mr. Moretti, I didn't realize you were in attendance. Clearly, Gabriel said, his voice soft, almost conversational, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. He took a slow step forward. I was observing the room, Mr. Harrison, and I couldn't help but overhear your pathetic attempt at humor at the expense of my guest. Bradley swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing frantically. Your guest, Miss Caldwell, is one of the most brilliant forensic minds in this city, Gabriel stated, his gaze pinning Bradley like a butterfly to a corkboard. Her intellect is matched only by her beauty, a concept I wouldn't expect a mediocre mid-level manager to grasp. Bradley's hands began to shake. The scotch in his glass sloshed against the rim. He tried to muster his corporate bravado, puffing out his chest. Now hold on a second. There's no need to hurl insults. It was just a joke between old acquaintances. A joke, Gabriel repeated, tasting the word. He tilted his head. Let us share a joke then, Bradley. Let us talk about the Vanguard Holdings offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, specifically the ones routed through the shell company in Belize. The color completely vanished from Bradley's face. He looked as though he might vomit right there on the Persian rug. Senator Hayes and the other elites stepped back, their expressions morphing from amusement to intense, self-preserving horror. No one wanted to be in the blast radius of Gabriel Moretti's wrath. I don't know what you're talking about," Bradley stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You leveraged client funds." Gabriel said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent crowd. "You lost $40 million in a catastrophic short position last quarter, and to cover it up you borrowed $20 million from a private equity group in Chicago, a group that unfortunately for you is owned by me." Evelyn dropped Bradley's arm, as if he had caught fire, taking 3 rapid steps backward into the crowd. "You are a thief, Bradley." Gabriel continued, stepping into Bradley's personal space. The height difference made Bradley look like a trembling child. "You are a fraud, and worse, you lack basic manners. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, the SEC will have an anonymous dossier on their desks, detailing every wire transfer you've made in the last 2 years. By noon, Oaktree Capital will fire you to save their own skin. And by tomorrow night, my associates will come to collect the $20 million you owe me." With interest. Bradley's breathing became erratic, a high-pitched wheezing sound escaping his chest. "Please," he begged, all his previous arrogance shattered into dust. "Mr. Moretti, please. I can fix it. I can get the money." "You have nothing," Gabriel said, his tone utterly bored. He dismissed the broken man with a flick of his eyes. "Get out of my sight before I have you removed in pieces." Bradley didn't hesitate. He dropped his Scotch glass on a passing waiter's tray and practically sprinted for the exit, leaving his fiancée behind in the crowd. The elites who had been laughing moments before were now staring at the floor, terrified to make eye contact with the syndicate boss. Gabriel turned his back on the crowd, acting as if he hadn't just destroyed a man's entire life in less than 3 minutes. He looked down at Nora, the lethal hardness in his eyes melting away, replaced by a dark, intense heat that made her breath catch. He extended his elbow toward her. "This party has grown incredibly tedious, don't you agree?" Gabriel asked softly. "Would you do me the honor of joining me on the terrace, Miss Caldwell?" Nora stared at his offered arm. Her mind was spinning. The sheer, overwhelming whiplash of going from public humiliation to being rescued by New York's most dangerous predator left her dizzy. She knew exactly who he was. She knew taking his arm meant crossing a line from the safe, illuminated corporate world into the terrifying shadows of his empire. But as she looked up into Gabriel Moretti's eyes, she didn't see a monster. She saw the only person in the room who had looked at her and seen a queen. Slowly, deliberately, Nora slipped her arm through his. "I would love to, Mr. Moretti," she said. A genuine, devastatingly handsome smile touched the corners of Gabriel's mouth. "Please," he murmured, guiding her smoothly through the parting sea of terrified socialites. "Call me Gabriel." As they stepped through the heavy French doors onto the private frost-kissed balcony overlooking Central Park, the cold air felt sharp and sobering. The door clicked shut behind them, muting the jazz band inside. Gabriel released her arm, stepping over to the stone balustrade. He didn't speak immediately, allowing her a moment to process the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred. Nora walked over to the edge, wrapping her arms around herself, shivering slightly in her silk gown. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb. "You don't know me. I'm not your guest." Gabriel turned to face her, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. I know exactly who you are, Nora Caldwell. You are the auditor who caught a $3 million skimming operation orchestrated by the Diablos cartel last year. You are the woman who traced the untraceable. He took a slow step toward her. I didn't step in out of charity. I stepped in because a man who holds a priceless diamond in his hands and complains about the weight of it is a fool, and I despise fools. He stopped mere inches from her. The heat radiating from his large frame offered a sudden, intoxicating comfort against the winter chill. I've been watching you for 6 months, Nora. Gabriel confessed, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. And tonight I decided it was time to introduce myself, because I have a problem that only a mind like yours can solve, and because, quite frankly, I couldn't stand back and watch that pathetic excuse for a man insult the most beautiful woman in my city. The freezing wind whipping across the Pierre Hotel terrace did nothing to cool the sudden blazing heat in Nora's chest. She stared at Gabriel Moretti, searching his sharp, aristocratic features for a punchline. There was none. Only the lethal stillness of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "You want to hire me?" Nora said, her forensic mind instantly snapping into gear, compartmentalizing the shock. To audit a criminal syndicate, Gabriel removed his charcoal tuxedo jacket and draped it over her bare shoulders. The silk lining was heavy, retaining his body heat and the faint, intoxicating scent of bergamot and gun oil. "I prefer the term logistics enterprise," Gabriel corrected smoothly, though a dark amusement danced in his eyes. "But yes, for the past 8 months, someone inside my inner circle has been siphoning capital. They are routing it through legitimate subsidiaries, washing it, and making it vanish. My internal accountants are competent, but they are looking at the trees. I need someone who can see the forest. I need a predator." Nora pulled the lapels of his jacket closer. "If I do this, I cross a line, Gabriel. I become an accessory to whatever it is your enterprise does. You cross a line into my protection," Gabriel countered, stepping closer. "Tell me, Nora, what has playing by the rules gotten you a brilliant career where your boss takes the credit? An ex-fiancé who publicly humiliated you because his fragile ego couldn't handle a woman with substance." He reached out his large, rough hand, gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. The contrast between his dangerous reputation and his tender touch made her breath hitch. "I do not want a starving, hollowed-out corporate drone," Gabriel murmured, his gaze dropping to the lush curves of her waist and hips enveloped in the emerald silk. "I want a woman who takes up space, a woman whose mind is a labyrinth and whose body is a masterpiece. Work for me, Nora. Expose the rot in my house, and I will make you untouchable." Nora looked out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan. The safe world inside that ballroom had only ever offered her judgment, restrictions, and pain. The shadows Gabriel offered promised respect. "I need complete access," Nora said, turning back to him, her voice steady. "Unredacted ledgers, offshore shell companies, crypto wallets, everything. And I work from my own secure servers." Gabriel smiled, a slow, devastating curve of his lips. "Consider it done." By Tuesday morning, Nora's home office had transformed into a war room. Gabriel had not exaggerated. The financial architecture of Moretti Logistics was a dizzying, hydra-headed beast spanning 3 continents. To protect her, Gabriel had implemented strict protocols. 1. Absolute isolation. She was to take a leave of absence from her firm, citing a family emergency. 2. Secure communications. All findings were to be transmitted via a heavily encrypted offline terminal his technicians installed in her living room. 3. Physical security. She was never to leave her apartment without the two towering men in dark suits stationed discreetly in her building's lobby. For 72 hours, Nora lived on black coffee and sheer adrenaline. She cross-referenced shipping manifests with phantom real estate holdings in Dubai, tracking the microscopic breadcrumbs the thief had left behind. She was a woman, possessed her plus-size frame, comfortably curled into her large office chair as her fingers flew across the keyboards. On Thursday night at 2 a.m., she finally found the thread. She began mapping the discrepancies, building a clear matrix of the stolen funds. The thief was clever, hiding the money in plain sight by inflating the depreciation of international cargo ships and routing the losses into dummy holding companies. But it was the final routing destination that made Nora's blood run cold. The funds from the Panama wallet were being funneled back into the United States. They were being injected into a failing private equity fund to artificially inflate its numbers and prevent an SEC audit. The fund was Oaktree Capital Management. The account manager handling the injection was Bradley Harrison. Nora sat back, her mind spinning. Bradley wasn't just a cruel, incompetent hedge fund manager. He was a money launderer. But Bradley was entirely too stupid to engineer a scheme this complex. He was a pawn. The person who structured this needed to have intimate knowledge of forensic accounting to bypass Gabriel's internal audits and intimate access to Oaktree Capital. Her eyes darted to the digital signatures on the dummy holding companies. They were masked with a routing algorithm she recognized instantly. It was a proprietary masking technique developed by her own firm, specifically by her managing partner, David Montgomery. David, the man who had mentored her, who had smiled in her face while repeatedly passing her over for a partnership because she didn't fit the firm's aesthetic image. David and Bradley were working together to bleed the most dangerous man in New York. Nora grabbed the encrypted phone Gabriel had given her. She dialed his private number. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me you have a name, Mia Bella." Gabriel's dark voice purred through the speaker. "I have two," Nora said, her heart pounding. "And we are going to need a very specific trap." Friday evening, the rain in Manhattan fell in heavy, freezing sheets. David Montgomery sat in his expansive corner office overlooking Wall Street, pouring himself a glass of 20-year-old Macallan. He was a man who prided himself on control, on his impeccable silver hair, and his ruthless efficiency. The heavy oak doors of his office swung open without a knock. David frowned, turning around. "I told the reception desk I wasn't to be—" He stopped. Nora walked into the room. She wasn't wearing her usual conservative office wear. She was wearing a perfectly tailored crimson trench coat over a black, curve-hugging dress, her dark hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She looked powerful, vibrant, and utterly unafraid. "Nora." David blinked, setting his glass down. "You're supposed to be on leave. What are you doing here at this hour?" "Auditing David," Nora said smoothly, walking toward his desk and tossing a thick manila folder onto the polished mahogany. "I thought you'd be interested in my latest findings, specifically the Cobalt real estate ledgers." David's polite smile froze. The color drained from his face at a terrifying speed. He stared at the folder as if it were a live grenade. I don't know what you're talking about," David stammered, his hand subtly reaching for the heavy brass paperweight on his desk. "Don't insult my intelligence," Nora said, her voice dripping with ice. "You used my proprietary routing algorithms to mask your theft. You stole nearly $40 million from Gabriel Moretti, and you used Bradley Harrison's massive losses at Oaktree to wash the money. Bradley thought he was a genius, securing private equity bailouts, but you were just using him as your laundromat." David's grip tightened on the paperweight. The sophisticated facade crumbled revealing the desperate, cornered rat underneath. "You always were too smart for your own good, Nora," David hissed, taking a menacing step out from behind his desk. "But you're just a fat, invisible accountant. No one is going to believe you. In fact, if you happen to suffer a tragic accident on your way home tonight. I highly doubt that." The voice came from the shadows of the office doorway, cold and final as the grave. David froze, a pathetic squeak escaping his throat. Gabriel Moretti stepped into the light. He wore a black cashmere overcoat, the rainwater glistening on his broad shoulders. Behind him, two of his massive enforcers quietly closed and locked the office doors. Gabriel didn't even look at David. His eyes went straight to Nora, checking her for any sign of distress. Finding none, he smiled a proud, dark smile that made Nora's stomach flutter. "Mr. Montgomery," Gabriel said, finally turning his attention to the trembling senior partner. The temperature in the room plummeted. "You have something that belongs to me. Actually, you have 40 million things that belong to me. Mr. Moretti." David dropped the paperweight. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. He fell to his knees, his expensive suit wrinkling against the carpet. "Please, I can return it. All of it. Bradley has the liquid assets I can—" "Bradley Harrison is currently enjoying the hospitality of my associates in a soundproof basement in Queens," Gabriel interrupted softly. "He has already sung quite a beautiful song about your partnership. But you insulted Miss Caldwell. You stole her work. You stifled her career. And just now, you threatened her life." Gabriel walked slowly across the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't draw a weapon. But the sheer oppressive gravity of his presence made David sob in terror. "Take him," Gabriel ordered his men without looking back. "Empty his accounts, strip his assets, and then take him to the harbor. We have cargo ships that require maintenance in international waters." "No, please, Nora, tell him we're colleagues," David screamed as the two enforcers hauled him to his feet, dragging him toward the private service elevator. Nora looked at the man who had tormented her for years, the man who had made her feel small, invisible, and unworthy. She didn't feel pity. She felt vindicated. "Goodbye, David," she said simply. The heavy doors clicked shut, plunging the office into silence, save for the rain lashing against the glass. Nora let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline finally crashing. She closed her eyes, suddenly hyper-aware of the danger she had just navigated. A warm, heavy hand settled on her waist. Nora opened her eyes to find Gabriel standing mere inches away. The terrifying syndicate boss was gone, replaced by a man looking at her with overwhelming hunger and profound respect. "You were magnificent," Gabriel murmured, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her hip through the red trench coat. "Fierce, brilliant, and absolutely terrifying. My men were placing bets on whether you would need me to intervene at all." Nora laughed, a genuine, breathless sound. "I think I prefer having backup." "You will always have me," Gabriel said, his voice turning deadly serious. He stepped closer, crowding her against the edge of the mahogany desk. "No more hiding in the shadows, Nora. No more apologizing for taking up space in a room. You belong at the top of the empire." He leaned down his lips, brushing against her jawline, trailing fire down her neck. Nora arched into his touch, her hands sliding up the lapels of his wet cashmere coat to tangle in his dark hair. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worrying about how her stomach looked, or if her thighs were too wide. With Gabriel's hands gripping her lush curves like she was the most precious treasure on earth, she felt powerful. She felt beautiful. "And what exactly is my role in this empire?" Nora whispered, her breath catching as his lips met the corner of her mouth. Gabriel looked deep into her eyes, the dangerous, possessive loyalty of a mafia king burning in his gaze. "Whatever you want it to be, Mia Regina," he vowed softly right before he kissed her, claiming her mouth with the same ruthless, undeniable authority with which he ruled his city. The cold corporate world had tried to make Nora Caldwell shrink, but in the arms of the devil himself, she had finally learned how to reign. Did Nora's epic revenge on her toxic ex and corrupt boss give you chills? Sometimes the best way to handle a shattered heart is to become the queen of the underworld. If you loved this fierce, curvy heroine and her protective mafia, smash that like button, share this story with someone who loves a good revenge plot, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic, thrilling romance stories every single week. See you in the next video.